Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this live stream. If you are new to my channel, hello. My name is Fraise, and I do these live streams around. I'm trying to do them about every 2 weeks, where I like to just hop on here for like half an hour, 45 minutes, and make myself available to you as a writing resource. I make videos on this channel sharing writing tips and writing resources that helped me personally improve as a writer. And so I like to do these as a way that you can come on and ask me your own writing questions in person, and I can respond to them with my voice and in a format like this. So I keep them very casual. I just sit and do some work and have a cup of coffee. And or if it's early in the morning, which this is not, I will be having no coffee right now. But I just like to sit here, and if you have a writing question, then I can chat about it. If you don't have a writing question, I'm just gonna end up sitting here and doing some work. So if you have any questions about any projects that you're working on, if you've watched any of my videos and want clarification on something, if you want somebody to bounce ideas off of, if you're working on a story and you want some feedback on a plot or a title or a character or anything of that nature, just hop into the comments and ask away. Sometimes I'll need a little bit of context about the project that you're working on if you want feedback on a character. But if it's pretty slow, I'm super happy to go into as much detail about your stories as you want. So, yeah, if you have any questions, ask away. um, Hello, Old Pandas Creations. Thank you so much for stopping by and popping into the live stream. I'm so happy that you're here. Are you working on any writing project right now? Do you have any stories that you're working on right now then, or any questions about writing? Hi, Ramar. Thank you so much for coming. Let me know if you have any questions or anything that you want feedback on when it comes to writing, and I would be happy to chat about it. All right. Hi, Carla Craft. Thank you so much for stopping in and asking a question. Carla Craft asked, how do you edit your work? Do you finish the first draft, then edit? If so, do you search for POV discrepancies, for example? So this it depends on what project I'm working on. And I historically have had a process. I mean, in a perfect world, my process would be to come up with some sort of rough outline. I start very broad with my outlines and just come up with a very basic story structure. And then I use post-its and come up with specific scenes to chart along that story grid. And then I put everything into a plot grid, and I really like to outline in detail. And then I write a first draft, and I see that first draft all the way until the end. And then only after I have a completed first draft do I go back and edit. This does not always happen. I found that I personally have an issue writing the climax of a book if I haven't completely nailed in everything leading up to it, because the endings change so much depending on how you set them up. So this has been the case for the past maybe 4 books that I've written, is I haven't been able to write the climax. So I will first draft all the way up until the climax, and then I will go back and I will start to edit. I start with the very big picture edits, and then I go narrow down over time. I'd like to think of editing like I'm adding layers of edits to a story instead of trying to fix everything all at once. I do multiple passes, and I do a pass for, like, at the beginning, I try to clean up all of my plot stuff. So if I have a first draft of the book and I'm like, okay, these two characters, like, their relationship arc is not quite right, and there are a lot of things that I have to change, I have figured out that actually, instead of just being happy, I'm going to introduce all these like little conflicts to their relationship, and they're going to change a little bit in each of these scenes. So then I go back and I make notes and I rewrite the books so it fits with the rewrite that I decide to do. And once all of those big picture edits are out of the way, I'm ready to, like, move on from the plot, like, the plot is I'm happy with it, then I will typically read it through and just smooth out all of the really egregious sentences, like, I will read it out loud if I can, and things that don't sound right, things that are immediately redundant to my eye or my it just kind of I use my own judgment as, like, my first pass, and then after I do that, I typically work with or I use my self-editing checklist. So I'll go through, I delete all of the excessive justs, filtering words, probablys, um, all of those little words. Oh, actually, before I do that, I also edit for voice. So I make sure that all of my character dialogue sounds like the character that is speaking that dialogue. I usually do that maybe after that rough pass that I do on all of the prose to make sure all the prose sounds okay. And I've added things to it, or if something has to be more sensory, I'll add that in that first chunk, and then I'll go in and I'll edit for voice. Then I will do my filtering words pass, and then I will work with my line editor, and then he will read it and he'll edit it and he'll send it back to me. And after I've worked with the line editor, I go through it all again. I run it through Pro Writing Aid. I run it through Grammarly to check for typos, and I read it through again myself. My line editor reads it through again, and then I have a proofreader read it, and then my prose. That's kind of my editing process. But I do like to work in stages where, like, I get all of the plotting completely wrapped up before I do any of the prose. So it really does make a difference. It changes depending on the project I'm working on. Like, I'll have some projects that come together right away, and the prose and the dialogue feels really organic and natural, and it doesn't need as much editing as other projects where I'm like, I finished the first draft and I really need to do a lot to it before I even get to the prose. But if I try to think of all of it at once, it becomes very overwhelming. So I try to think of it as just chipping away at it and adding layers to the book and making it better layer by layer. Um, let's see. Chrome Vader asked, how do you know if a side character who is important to the progression of the plot needs their own character arc? Context for this question in the next message. Okay, let's see. My POV character needs to have a confrontation with the villain in an unanticipated collision, and the side character sets that up, but the side character doesn't factor into the rest of the book. Okay. So I think that the general so it sounds like your side character is only present in that confrontation. So if you have a side character that's only present in one scene, it's hard for them to have a character arc because I mean, while characters can have a character arc over one scene, their character arc usually has to be smaller scale. Like it's hard to transition from like a really evil guy to actually a good guy in just one scene. Um, I think it doesn't sound from the context like this character plays a really important role. I mean, it might play an important role in the plot, but I don't think that you necessarily need a fully fleshed out character arc for a character that just appears in this one section of the book. But it sounds like this is just, like, 1 or 2 scenes that they appear in. If it's 1 or 2 scenes, I'd say that you're probably okay. It doesn't sound like they're instrumental to the rest of the plot, but if this collision takes place over multiple or, like, a big chunk of your book, then maybe that might be worth thinking about, but I really only do character arcs for characters who are present from like the beginning to the end of the book. Because if you try to do too many character arcs, then your book can become really long and a little bit muddied. You have to kind of choose the ones that are most integral to your story and most interesting to your readers. So from your context, it sounds like this character may just be more of a plot device than a character that readers will connect to and want to see grow and change over the course of the story. Let's see. All right, we got a question. I am writing a book which I have started after my 17th birthday, which I should have started at 16. I'm planning to publish at 19. I have a question. How many chapters should a novel have? First of all, huge congratulations to writing a book. That is awesome. I think that how many chapters a novel should have depends on the novel. It depends on the length of your chapters. It depends on your genre. It's really hard for me to definitively say. Um, I think that there are there are books that have chapters that are just 2 pages long, and they have hundreds of chapters. Like, I'm pretty sure The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes has, they were the chapters were in the 90s, but the chapter numbers were in the 90s, but the book wasn't that long, just the chapters were really small. So, I think it depends what book you're writing and whether you're a person that likes having really short chapters. I typically have around maybe between 35 and 45 chapters in my novel, or in my novels, and each of them have roughly maybe 2,500 words in a chapter. So it's kind of where I've found my sweet spot is, but it really depends on your genre and how you like to write. There is no hard or fast rule about that. Um, And is that the same for a novella? I've never written novellas, so I can't really say I don't know very much about writing novellas and what the uh, rules are for writing with novellas. So I can't really comment on that. But I would do some Google searching to try to figure that out. But I really don't think there is any kind of hard and fast chapter rules for any of this stuff. It's hard to because people like chapters of different lengths. Um, all right, we got another question. I just read Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Great book. I haven't read that book in a long time, so I vaguely remember what it's about, but I remember liking it. Even though I thought it was okay, I don't think it would be popular today. What do you believe have tastes changed today? Are there really timeless books? Um, by the way, Dickens was insanely popular back in the day amongst normal working class people. Uh, Dickens is great. A Tale of Two Cities is one of my favorite books of all time. It is also very long. And I know Dickens, when he was writing, got paid by the word. And so he liked to pack in a lot of words that may not necessarily have been integral to his story. And he might have been a little more superfluous and relied on the long paragraphs of description, but so would I if I were getting paid by the word. Um, I think that tastes do change over time. I think that nowadays, the books that are very commercially successful, I mean, I think that a lot of people, because of the nature of social media and the internet today, I know I for sure have an attention span that's not as long as I did in high school, I think, because I have watched too many, TikToks and Instagram reels, and I like books that kinda get to the point a little faster now, and I don't necessarily have the attention span to sit around and read through tons of long paragraphs of description. So I think that a lot of people's tastes are trending in that direction. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. But I think that that is definitely something that I've noticed is books that go viral and get a lot of attention are the ones that are maybe a little bit more fast paced. Now, this is not a rule across the board. It's just something that I've noticed in a lot of popular books. I don't, I agree with you. I don't think that Great Expectations would go viral on TikTok. Um, but maybe I think I can't really comment on that. But from what I've seen, I think it might be just a little too slow to really hit it and take off um, nowadays with people's evolving tastes. Um, but I do think that there are timeless books because there are books that we still read today that people were reading back then. And they're just really good stories. Like maybe the writing conventions are a little bit different, or, maybe the writing styles and the language usage is a little different. But I think that there are stories that can stand the test of time. Um, all right, let's see. Um, all right, we got a question. Dog says, I'm struggling with something. I'm writing for the first time. I'm writing something in first person. How do you switch to the point of view of another character without making it abrupt and weird? So I typically switch points of view between chapters in my book because otherwise you can't. I've never ever switched point of view characters in the middle of a chapter because I find that that's a little bit awkward, but I do like I make sure when I'm plotting that I have each character narrate a section that comes to a close, and then I switch off which character is taking it over from there, which can be tough. Like, there are some moments in some of my scenes where I'm like, I really think that would be better narrated by a different character, but I don't wanna give my readers whiplash by just jumping and bouncing around all the time. So when I give them a point of view character, I wanna give them that point of view character for a little while and allow them to live with that point of view character for at least a full chapter, if not a couple chapters in a row. So I think that my advice would be just to not make your sections too short that are narrated by a specific point of view character. But I also would wanna mark them very clearly. So if you are switching, make sure you have a banner at the top that tells the readers which character is narrating that scene, and try to do some work and dig into your character voices. It's really important when you're writing in the first person, especially if you're writing from the point of view of multiple narrators, for you to tell them in different voices and for your narration and your actual writing to sound different, but like depending on which character you're writing in the point of view of. So you might have one character that's very prim and proper, and you might have one character who goes on like anxious rambles all the time, and might have one character who just like likes to use cuss words all the time. And reading those, like the two chapters, is it's going to be obvious that they're not narrated by the same person. Like, if you're familiar with Harry Potter, it would be like Luna Lovegood narrating a chapter and Hermione Granger narrating a chapter. You're not going to think that those are the same characters. So that's also really important when writing from multiple narrators, in the first person. Um, Thank you. I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you so much for watching and for watching my videos. I'm very grateful, for you coming to the stream. All right. In my own opinion, what is the point of a story? Is it just entertainment or is there a deeper purpose? This is a pretty deep question. I think that people read for a wide range of different reasons. I think that a lot of people do read just for entertainment, but I think a lot of people also do read to engage with people's thoughts and criticisms about society and about humanity. And I think that all of these books can exist together, and readers can pick and choose what they want to read depending on what need they have to fill in themselves. So I don't think there's one singular point. I think both of these things exist together. And I think certain books exist just to be entertaining, and certain readers read just to be entertained. And sometimes they read just to be entertained and then occasionally want to grapple with something a little heavier. And that's why we have such a wide variety of books. So, yeah, I think that there is definitely both there's truth to both of those things. And there are multiple points to different stories, and you as the author can decide what you want the point of your story to be. I think in order to reach very widespread commercial success in this day and age, you do have to have an entertaining story that people just find pleasure reading. But ideally, you can have a story that is entertaining and pleasurable to readers and also has some sort of deeper purpose or some sort of deeper commentary on something that you're passionate about. So I think that all of these, um, are possible together. Um, let's see. Um, all right. Um, RR says, "Hi Claire, working on a thriller novel with multiple main characters we follow, and all storylines are intertwined, but it's coming out more like a screenplay, a scene-setting intro, lots of dialogue, antagonist motive rooted deeply, antagonist motive rooted decades-long family history, and so all the present characters are somehow related to that historical event. So they're current characters, but also descendants of that event." Oh, that sounds very interesting. I don't think I'm fully done with your context. I think there's probably more that you are writing. Um, so I will come back to this once you're done and once you finish writing your question, but this sounds like it's very interesting. Um, I've done some screenplay writing, and screenplays are really fun and a completely different ball game than writing fiction. But they're very fun. I find them very challenging. Um, let's see. We have, can fiction books work without protagonist's love interest? I'm confused whether to introduce a love interest in an adventure tragedy fiction. You absolutely do not need a love interest. You can definitely write fiction without a love interest. Obviously, you can't write romance without a love interest, but if you're writing like an adventure tragedy fiction, I would say that you really don't need a love interest. I personally like writing love interests into my books because I like writing about that, and I think that it's fun and it adds a dimension to my stories that I find really enjoyable to write about, but it also dovetails nicely into the stories that I'm writing. So if you don't feel like it's working in your story, I don't think that you need to include it. I'd actually argue that it's better if you don't include it because no romance is better than an awkward or forced in romance that doesn't belong there. Um, BB Gun asked, "What do you do when you come to a part in your story you can't figure out? I know my start and end and lots of in between scenes, but I'm stuck on midpoint. I keep turning it over and over with no success." I know this feeling very well. I don't have any tricks to that solve it. Like, I don't really have any easy hacks that I recommend doing to get through this. It just takes a lot of experimentation and moving things around. And going back to the drawing board and freeing up your brain. I find that if I get too stuck in my head about my story or if I get too attached to certain things, that it's harder for me to think through and around problems because I am limiting myself somehow in my subconscious brain to thinking that I have to go a certain way with my story. But if I completely throw everything out and I go back to the drawing board and I allow myself to like write down crappy ideas and I take sticky notes and I just write things and I stick them on the wall and I just try to get as much out of my brain as possible and treat it as a very casual brainstorm, then something usually frees up in my head and allows me to approach things from a different angle. And that can help me get like puzzle through areas of my story that I can't figure out. But I know the feeling because it's really tricky when it feels like you're putting together a puzzle and the pieces aren't quite fitting the way that you want them to fit, and it's just incredibly frustrating. Yeah, so I sympathize with you and would recommend trying to just take some of the pressure off and go back to the like fun, creative brainstorming side of yourself that you have when you're first coming up with story ideas. Let go of a lot of the things in your story that you like think that you need to have or think you need to accomplish and let go of the pressure and just brainstorm and brain dump and put as much on the page and like as many ideas on the sticky notes and stick them everywhere as possible. And hopefully that will unlock something and make it a little bit easier to get past that. But yeah, lots of aggressive brainstorming. Like I will force myself to come up with like 20 different midpoint ideas. And usually all of them are terrible. Like even if they're bad, like I'm like aliens descend and like kill all my characters. Like even if they're bad, just have some sort of thing on my list of 20 midpoints. And then that usually frees up something. And then maybe one of those ideas will be good. All right, let's see. Um, all right. Do you personally write more for entertainment or both? And what do you hope your reader feels and walks away from reading your work? Wow, you're really like hitting me with the deep questions today. It's always like stressful when somebody hits me with a deep question on a live because I actually have to think through it in the moment. I can't just like rehearse what I'm going to say. Um, so my book and my series, They Stay, was born from this place of just absolute love and passion and excitement. And it was born from the place and the part of me that had been a fangirl and, like, a fan of books for so long because I was that and I still am that person that when I get obsessed with a book and a world, I was the kid that just wanted to, like, draw fan art all day and like, create playlists all the time and just write fan fiction, and I just wanted to live in that world, and I wanted to take all of the quizzes to figure out, like, which Hogwarts house I was gonna be in, and I had so much love, like, pouring out of me for all of my favorite stories, and when I created the world and the characters and they stay, I had that feeling, and it just came from a place of so much love for the characters and for the adventure and for the world, and so I wasn't going into it trying to make some sort of deep commentary about the world or about humanity. I didn't have an agenda. It was born out of a place of love and a place of just really enjoying the world and the story. So I would say that because of that, I wrote for entertainment in that sense, I guess. Like I wanted people to enjoy it the way that I loved it, and I wanted to create a world that other people could love the way that I loved the world. But as I was writing it, the characters are so real to me and they go through some really tough things and some really real tough things that a lot of people go through in real life. And they go through some very like hard personal human struggles. And so when I was writing that, I felt very strongly and deeply that I wanted to write those things with and be very mindful about the way that I portrayed those things. And I wanted to do their characters and stories justice and be as realistic as possible when digging into these very real and hard and gritty human emotions and human situations and predicaments. So I think that I wrote it for entertainment, but I took it very seriously and I wanted to tackle the heavy stuff in a way that both brought awareness to it, but also treated it with this sev treat it with the respect and, like, seriousness that it needs to be treated with when you're writing about that in fiction. So, I I really I think that's the best way that I would describe it. I didn't have any agenda when I was writing it, but I just really loved it, and I hope people walk away from it, think like, having had a really nice experience and having been able to spend time in a world and with characters that they enjoyed the presence of. I think would be my answer to that. Um, and oh, um, I'm thank you so much for liking They Stay. I'm so happy that you like the series. Um, and I'm very glad that you can see the love that I put into it because it's really is and it has been a labor of love and it still is. I'm working on the 5th and final book now, and thinking about it is getting me all emotional because I've been living this world for the past 6 years, and I love this world, and I love these characters, and they're so real to me, and it's really bittersweet wrapping up the series and seeing where I'm gonna leave them off, and just how I'm gonna figure out how to bring them like, I just it's sad to say goodbye to them, but it's also really exciting to get to move on to new projects, and I'm very happy with where everything is ending for them, but it's also sad to have to say goodbye. Um, but I thank you so much. Yeah, my whole series is in Kindle Unlimited. The 5th book will be going up for pre-order very shortly. I am working on kind of finishing that up a little bit now, and, yeah, it's I'm very excited about it. Um, alright, let's see. What's our next question? Um, oh, when did you start writing Imperfect? I don't usually get questions about Imperfect on this channel, that's very exciting. I started writing Imperfect when I was 11, I think. Um, I decided I wanted to write a book when I was 11, and I was obsessed with the Hunger Games and wrote this, like, kind of Hunger Games little copycat story called, like, Gladiator Girl, about a girl that has to, like, go be a gladiator and, like, fight for Julius Caesar and stuff, and it was very silly and, but that was my excitement writing that was what drove me to want to write Imperfect, and it wasn't like, Imperfect is not a Julius Caesar fan fiction at all. But yeah, I think it was a while. I've been writing it for a little while before I published it. I yeah started when I was 11, and then I started writing Imperfect for real. I think at about 13, and then I published Imperfect when I just turned 16. So I stopped working on it when I was 15. But yeah, that was a also a labor of love that really just came from a place of creating a world that I loved and I wanted to be in, and yeah, that I wanted to share with people. That's the place that I always come to from when I'm writing my books. Is just this place of being really excited about the story and like fangirling about my own story and wanting other people to fangirl about it with me. Um, let's see. This is really exciting. Thank you all for asking so many great questions. Um, let's see. Um, thank you so much. I am very, very excited. I know I also kind of feel like I graduated. It feels like a very big accomplishment, like to have like a 5 book series of these like books that I'm really proud of. Like I have them all up on my shelf and I just look at them and I'm excited. I mean, I don't have the 5th book yet because it's just a document. It's just like a little document on my computer. But once it's up there, it's just I'm gonna get so giddy seeing all of them together. What's one advice you rarely hear people say that you learned from writing specifically a long series? This is a good question. Um, I'm not sure if people say this frequently or not, but I would have to say it's important to know your ending and it's important to know where you're going, but it is equally important to be flexible and know that you're going to have to change things and pivot as you're writing. Because as thoroughly as you think that you will have plotted out that series, things are going to change as you discover things in the story. And you're going to discover good ideas. You're going to discover ideas that are even better than your original conceptions. And you have to be willing to roll with the different things that come up. I have had to do a lot of rethinking things and replotting things. And while I have known what was going to happen in the 5th book of my series, once like from when I started writing the series, it still like when I started writing the 5th book was a challenge to try to figure out how I was going to tie everything together and how I was going to put everything in like together in the way that I wanted to for the climax of the story. So, yeah, I would say you need to be very flexible and know that, it's kind of daunting because it's almost like you have a train and and the train is running and you have to like put tracks in front of the train and the train is like going and you can't like change the stuff that you've already done. Like the train's already pointed in one direction. So you have to work with the things that you've done. You might have written yourself into a corner in the previous book, but you have to take what you've already done and roll with that and keep moving forward with it. But you also need to have a direction because if you have no direction, things can kind of fall and be not very good. And like the worst thing you want to do is make your series stretch on too long or make it so that your ending is really bad. Because if you don't have a good ending, it's going to ruin your series. So that's why right now I have my ending, but I am asking like all of my previous ARC team readers and reviewers. Oh, geez, I'm going to sneeze. all of my previous ARC team readers and reviewers and my beta readers, and just trying to get as many fans of the series as possible to come and beta read the final book, because I want to make sure that the ending is satisfying and it hits the notes and it's like it sticks the landing. And so I'm trying to open it up to all the people that have really loved the series so far. So if you're watching this and you're interested in helping in beta reading the 5th book of the series and then like working on it and having your feedback be help shape the ending for all of these characters, email me and let me know, because that is something that I'm working on right now. So yeah, somehow like both be flexible and know where you're going at the same time and figure out how to balance those two things. Let's see. When writing the first book of what will become a long-running series, how much do I need to foreshadow future books, plots, and characters in that first book? The series I'm starting is envisioned to be sort of an open-edged series that could potentially continue for a dozen or more books with small story arcs throughout, but the same cast of characters. There is an overarching storyline that will ultimately resolve at the end of the series, but it won't be center stage in most of the books, more of a side plot around the POV characters. So my question is in regards to how much do I need to be foreshadowing later books' individual plots in the series' debut book? Gotcha. Um, so I think that as much foreshadowing as you'd like to do, it's not a bad thing. It's fun to plant Easter eggs in the first book that you can come back to later, because readers will appreciate, I think, that you'd been thinking that far ahead of like later books in your series. However, if you haven't plotted out all those books, you shouldn't feel bound to foreshadow those books. And I wouldn't foreshadow them too much or in too much detail, because you also don't know how that plot is going to change. You might not end up using the things that you foreshadow in the first book in later books. I know there are things that I foreshadowed in They Stay that I'm not using in the finale because I thought I would end up using them, but there are a couple of little things that don't really make a whole ton of sense with how I decided to build the world later on. And I thought that they would when I was first writing They Stay, but once I learned more about the mechanics and I did more world building of my ghost world and I really dove into the nitty-gritty details on how all of that works, some of the things I put in there didn't make sense. So I did do some foreshadowing, and some of it really does apply. And I also did some subconscious foreshadowing. Like I went back and I reread They Stay and noticed little things in there that I did not intend to put in there that ended up being foreshadowing to the later books in the series. So that was very cool. But yeah, I wouldn't go crazy trying to do this, but think of it maybe as dropping little Easter eggs just in case, because you really don't want to bind yourself to having a bunch of like foreshadowing in book one that doesn't make sense in later books because you've changed something. Or like, yeah, you don't want it to not make sense, but you also like want to have like little nuggets that can make readers excited to continue reading forward. So I think you have to figure out what the balance is for yourself. Um, let's see. Um, do you have any tips on writing a book series without giving up? Yes, I do. I've tried writing a book series, but I gave up on the first one. So I definitely think that you should try to finish the first book. I think that that is huge for getting you through an entire series. It's impossible to write a series without writing a book one. So you need to start by finishing that first book. And I think a lot of writing a series comes down it really is just writing one book after the other. I didn't think about it as writing like a full 5-book series. Like when I was on book 3, I wasn't like, "Oh my god, I have to plot out all 5 books." I knew vaguely what was gonna happen, like the 3 sentences description of, um, book 4 and then of book 5, and I knew how like, vaguely how it's gonna end. I did not know the specifics because I'm now still discovering the specifics of how everything is gonna happen, but while I was writing book 3, I was not thinking about book 5. So break it down, and it doesn't have to be as daunting as writing a 5-book series, because if you go in like, "Wow, I have to write a 5-book series," that's a lot of material, and that's a lot of stuff that you have to write, just take it one book at a time and just focus on the book one. Your book one is the most important book in your entire series because that's going to determine how many people actually go on to read the later books in your series. So I think a lot of tips for just finishing a book apply to writing a book series without giving up. I think trying to let go of perfection and just put all of your ideas on the page. Try to follow the love and figure out what it is that you love about this book and that you love about this story, and follow that feeling and follow the characters that you love and follow the subplots that you love and write all of the things about this story that you love and spend time in the places and parts of that story that you love. And I think you're going to find that you're going to enjoy writing it more and you're going to have the final product that people are also going to enjoy. I think if you're a plotter, it really helps to outline your books and try to figure out some basic plot points and just understanding of where you're going to go, because for me personally, I am a lot more likely to give up on a writing project if I don't know where it's going, because that just frankly stresses me out and I get bogged down in the middle and it feels too scary and overwhelming. So I think try that if you're a plotter. If Even if you're a pantser, maybe just a tiny bit more outlining so that you don't get stuck and you always know what you're writing towards. And just have as much fun with it as possible, because writing should be fun and it's supposed to be fun and it's something that you're passionate about. So just whenever you feel overwhelmed, try to boil it, take it back, like just take a step back and simplify things and write something like a scene between two characters that you really love and reconnect with your enjoyment of the story, or go back and outline a little bit, and hopefully that will be able to push you through the sticky moments. I hope that helps. I know that was a little bit long and rambling. Um, BB Gun asked, "How much do you worry about plot holes? Do you let some go?" This is a great question. Um, I worry about plot holes a lot, but that is because I have some I had when I wrote Imperfect, I had a lot of plot holes in it, and I was like 11 through 15 when I wrote it. So, there were a lot of inconsistencies with the world building, and there were some plot holes, and there are, a million things I would do differently if I were approaching that story today. But I had some reviews of Imperfect that really tore apart like every single little plot hole. And when I was like 16 reading those, it just like filled me with so much shame that I have become it made me very like worried about plot holes. So I became very focused on trying to iron out all plot holes, and they say, and make sure that everything is perfectly ironclad. It's pretty much impossible to write like a ghost world that is completely ironclad. Like, there are always gonna be little things that might conflict with each other, or it's hard to write like a 5-book series where, you need the ghost to be able to do all of these things, and you have to create a system where they can do all of these things. And I have found that as I've been writing the series and I'm like, "Oh, it would be really cool if the ghost could do this thing," but a book ago, I said that the ghost couldn't do this thing, so I have to get a little bit creative with figuring out why the ghost can do this thing, because that thing is very cool, and I want the ghost to be able to do that because I want the plot to be cool, but I don't wanna go against what I had already established that the ghost could or could not do in the book before. So, I think I've had to get a little creative with it. I do worry about plot holes. I take it seriously because it really bothers me if I have an egregious plot hole, and I try to be as, rigid about it as absolutely possible. But that being said, things still do slip through the cracks, which is completely normal, and I am sure that I can't think of any off the top of my head because I am actually pretty detail oriented when it comes to that, but I guarantee you there are a couple of little inconsistencies in the series. I'm sure there are. Um, and yeah, if any of you have any, drop them in the comments that you have found in my series. But Yeah, I would say I am worried about it, and I do take it seriously because even when you do take it seriously, things still fall through the cracks. So you don't wanna, like, pass something off as being fine and then have, like, 2 other things slip through the cracks that you weren't aware of. But that being said, though, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the show Gilmore Girls, but that is my favorite TV show of all time, or one of them, and I've loved that show ever since I was a kid, and I just rewatch it all the time, and there are some plot holes in that show that bother me so much. Like, they really irritate me, but I still watch the show anyway because I enjoy the heck out of that show, and it does not impact my enjoyment of the show, but I do notice them. But I love the show so much that it doesn't detract from my enjoyment. So just because there's an occasional plot hole in a story, if the story's really good and people are really connected to the characters and in your world, it shouldn't make or break their enjoyment of your story. Just try not to have too many of them. Um, yeah, if any of you are Gilmore Girls fans, like the fact that Kirk is a completely different person in the first chapter really, or like in the first pilot episode than he is a couple episodes later, really irritates me. Like, there are a couple of other ones, like Jackson all of a sudden is town selectman, and then it's just never mentioned again, and then he's not town selectman anymore. Like, what happened? Like, we never know. Like, just like little things like that really irk me. Just things that are like Dave Fragowski. Whatever happened to him? We don't know if he's still with Lane. I could go on about this for a while actually, but yeah, just but it doesn't detract. It just like when I'm rewatching and I encounter something like that, I find it very irksome, but I still watch the show because I love the show. Um, oh, thank you so much, Richard, for that's thank you so much for supporting the stream and for supporting the channel. That's super, super kind of you. And thank you so much for asking a question. Is chapter 7 too late for an inciting incident, assuming my book is 20 chapters long? I would say yes. Yeah, because I think if your book is 20 chapters long, chapter 7 is approaching halfway through your book. Um, I think that chapter 7 is a little bit too close to a midpoint. If your book's 20 chapters long, I would try to get your inciting incident in. And, like, honestly, if you can get it in chapter 1, perfect. If you can get it in chapter 2, awesome. If you can get it in chapter 3, also good. But I would not get it in much later than chapter 4. Um, because as I was talking about at the beginning of the stream, people's attention spans are also not as long as they have been historically. And I think that it's better to try and catch people's attentions as fast as possible. And if they feel like your story is not necessarily going anywhere early, then they might not be as inclined to continue reading. So, yeah, I would say it's a little bit late, but if you want to give me more context in the comments, I would be super happy to uh, share my opinions on that too. Because a little bit of context can also help me figure out, like, if you tell me vaguely what your plot is about and then what your inciting incident is and then why it's in chapter 7, because if there's a reason it's in chapter 7, maybe we can get creative and try to brainstorm a way to, like, move the things that are before the inciting incident after the inciting incident, which can be very challenging to do and can be a lot of messing with things, but also usually completely possible. Um, what is a plot hole? A plot hole is a plot inconsistency, like some sort of element of your plot that doesn't really make sense in the larger scheme of your plot. I I'm trying to think of an example, and I'm kind of having a little bit of a tough time thinking of an example, but it's like one of those things in movies where it's something that doesn't make sense in the larger scheme of your entire story, or that goes against it, or that would make the readers be like, wait, but if this person was doing this at this time, wouldn't that mean that they couldn't be here at this time doing this thing, which means that they, like, actually weren't the murderer because of this, even though you framed them as the murderer of your story. It's just like a logical inconsistency in your story. um Movies have a lot of plot holes. Yeah, they do. um and movies can get away with more plot holes because people don't have time to think. I also think that's true. I mean, in books, it's a lot trickier because usually, I mean, people spend a lot more time reading books, and books go into a lot more detail than movies do. So I think it's harder for you to get away with plot holes in books because people hold you to a higher standard when they're reading a book than when they're watching a movie. Um, let's see. I think I've missed a couple questions, so I'm going to go back up and see if I missed any questions. If any of you have more questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I will have to wrap this up fairly shortly um, because we're approaching an hour. Crazy how quickly that went. Um, absolutely love Gilmore Girls. Yay, another Gilmore Girls fan. And you're right, there are some stories that are so good that I'm able to forgive the plot holes. That's exactly how I feel about Gilmore Girls. It's like it's so good that I really just don't care about the plot holes. And the plot holes do annoy me a little bit, but I love the characters and I love the world, and I will watch that show forever, even though there are little plot holes like that. It's just it's so good. I have been watching it for so long that I listen to it almost like a podcast. Like, whenever I'm stressed about anything, I will just put it on while I'm just doing the dishes or walking around the house or brushing my teeth or just anything, and I'll have it in my pocket. I don't even have to see the screen, and I can, like, basically recite the like, I just I'm it's the best show ever. Um, let's see, are plot grids and story grids the same thing? I think so. Let me just look it up because I don't actually know what the story grid is. Let me see. Um, are you talking about, like, the website, the story grid? Because I actually haven't seen that before. Um, I actually so I don't know if I can answer because it looks like there are books called The Story Grid, but I know if you're familiar with story grids, you'd probably be able to know the answer to this more than me, but I do know plot grids are the, um, little Excel kind of grid-like outline for stories. Um Yeah, I do yeah, exactly. I use plot grids for my outline. I don't know if story grids are the same thing. I don't know if that's another term used to describe plot grids. I just Googled it and it just came up with a website. Um, but yeah, I'm very familiar with plot grids, and I've only ever called them plot grids, but I guess you could call them story grids unless story grids refer to something else. But I use plot grids for my outlines, and I have for a long time, and they're my favorite way to outline books. It's like a grid. I usually use Google Sheets to do it, and in the grid, every single column corresponds to like a plot in your book, and every single row corresponds to a chapter. So you can plot all your plots and subplots and then figure out what needs to happen in each plot over the course of every chapter in order for all of your plots and subplots to develop over the course of your book. It helps me keep track of everything when I feel like I'm getting overwhelmed by all the moving pieces. Um, all right, let's see. How do you avoid plot holes? I feel like I always find them in my writing. Yeah, these are a little tricky. I tend to use outlining to avoid my plot holes and try to get ahead of them by thinking about my stories as a puzzle that I'm putting together from the very first conception. Before I even put words on the page, I'm building out that plot to try to make sure everything makes sense from beginning to end and that I don't write in one direction and then have a completely and like different thing happen by the end of the story. Um, so I use outline to try to get ahead of it. And then I always have beta readers read my books. That's a really important part of my process. If I have beta readers read. They are very good at pointing out when things don't make sense. And so I use that also to help me find plot holes. And I also have my editor work on my books with me. And if he is reading and finds a plot hole, he tells me. Usually, all three of those stages are pretty good at weeding out plot holes. But I also have to be very rigid and like ask myself questions and follow lines of thought. Like, if this happens, then this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen. So then this is going to happen, and keep following the trains to try to make sure I think everything through so I don't accidentally create a plot hole. But yeah, I mean, it's hard. But also, when you are focusing on just like writing the book, don't stress about that at the beginning. Like, do your best to try to create a plot that makes sense. But if you find a plot hole, don't beat yourself up or really stress about it, because those are always things that can be fixed later. I mean, unless they're like really structural. If you discover a really, really big plot hole that calls your entire book into question, maybe stop writing and then go back and try to figure out, but and like what you're going to do to fix that. But usually you can find that with a little bit of outlining and you can get to the bottom of that pretty quickly. Um, oh, thank you so much for the support. Your videos helped give me the confidence to write my first book, a dystopian political satire. Oh, that's so exciting. I'm so happy that my videos were helpful and that they could help you write that book. I am so proud and excited for you. That is really awesome. As soon as your book is published, you should come to the next stream and put a link in the description so we can all go check it out. That's really exciting. Congratulations. That's so awesome. Um, all right. I think I can take maybe one or two more questions, and then I'm going to have to wrap it up. Can the mentor figure turn out to be the antagonist? Yeah. I mean, anything is possible. There are no hard and fast rules to fiction. I think absolutely the mentor can turn out to be the antagonist. I think if you're doing a very traditional hero's journey, typically the mentor is not the antagonist, but yeah, I think that absolutely can be the case. Um, and let's see. Coral T said, "Hello, watching from good old Ecuador. Hello, thank you so much for coming to the stream. Thoughts on having a multimedia franchise like Star Wars that starts with a book series, in the sense that I have multiple characters within the same universe, several time periods, and such?" Um, well, I think that there are a lot of universes like that that actually are very popular in fiction, and a lot of authors, especially in like the sci-fi world, do very well creating universes and then creating a lot of fictional like series within the same universe. So I think that that actually is a really successful way to build a series and like build your own book world, because once you have a loyal fan of one series, it'll be easy for them to hop over to a different series of yours set in the same universe. It's kind of like the romance books that do like, I don't know, like the Western romances that all take place on the like same like ranch or something, and it's like all a different like they're all falling in love with a different cowboy on the same ranch, like but they're all tied together because they all live on the same ranch. So I think that, that's actually a very successful strategy for bringing in readers and building long-term fans. I like the puzzle analogy. That seems to be what I'm doing for book two. That's really how I think about constructing my stories. It really feels like I'm putting together a puzzle, because you really like, especially book two is so hard. Book two, I struggled so much when I wrote book two of my series. And it was very scary because I had all these reviews of book one, and I really didn't want to be like the sequel that falls flat. So it was really nerve wracking. And I just outlined that book to pieces. And it was very helpful to think of it as like something I was constructing instead of something I was discovering. But that's also just how my brain works. Like I like digging into the like little subtleties of the plots, and I really like moving things around and putting things together that way. I find it very exciting. All right, so I think that will be it for our stream tonight. Thank you all so much for coming and asking such wonderful questions. I really love doing these. This is really fun. I'm going to schedule another one for, I think, 2 weeks from today, so we can do this again, and hopefully you will all join me. Um, Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic week, and as always, happy